The building had been dying for longer than anyone could remember living in it. 6 floors of cracked render and rust-bled balconies, hollowed out one family at a time, until only the 3rd floor still held a light on after dark. The stairwell smelled of cold concrete and standing water, of mildew working slow and patient through the plaster. At night, the wind found every gap in the window frames and turned the whole structure into something that breathed. A long, low exhale through the empty stairwells, the wet creak of a door nobody had touched in years swinging an inch on its hinge and stopping. She heard it first the way a mother hears things, in the gap between her son's breathing and her own. A thud, then another, evenly spaced, 4 full seconds apart, dull and muffled as a heartbeat heard through a pillow. It came from the floor above, the abandoned floor, the one with the boarded windows and the door the landlord, before he too disappeared, had nailed shut from the outside. She would lie rigid on her side of the bed, the boy's small back warm against her ribs, and count the rhythm until it blurred into the rain. 4 seconds. A pause. 4 seconds. Like something enormous, patiently waiting, tapping one wide finger against a drum it hadn't yet decided to play. She asked her son once in the grey hour before school if he heard the knocking at night. He looked at her the way children look at adults who have started saying strange things, and said no. Only the rain. Only the pipes. She didn't ask again. She told herself it was the building settling, water hammer in dead pipes, a loose gutter slapping brick in the wind. She told herself this every night for 3 months, and every night the telling worked a little less. The bruises came without announcement, a soft violet stain along her forearm where she hadn't bumped anything, a deeper one blooming low on her hip like a thumbprint pressed from the inside out. She wore long sleeves even as the apartment grew stuffy with the coming summer, and when her son asked why her hands shook while she wrung out the laundry, she told him she was only tired, only needed more sleep. A small laugh worn thin enough to see through. The exhaustion sat under her eyes in deep plum half-moons that no sleep seemed to lighten. She moved through her chores with a long, controlled sigh between each one, folding towels, sighing, wiping the counter, sighing, as though her body had started rationing its own breath. She never told him she'd stopped sleeping at all in the hour the thudding began. She simply lay there, eyes open in the dark, listening to the ceiling, waiting for whatever it was to finish whatever it was doing, while upstairs, patient and unbothered by her wakefulness, the rhythm went on. She died on a Tuesday, in the flat gold light of 4 in the afternoon, the kind of light that makes a room look underwater. He found her sitting upright in the kitchen chair, hands folded in her lap as though she'd simply paused mid-thought, head tipped a few degrees toward the window. The boy said her name twice before he understood the silence in the room was not the ordinary kind. There was no struggle in her face, only a strange, total stillness. The stillness of a held breath that had simply been allowed to stop. At the funeral, 4 men stood at the very back of the small gathering, beneath the leafless tree at the edge of the cemetery path. They wore heavy black robes too thick for the weather, the cloth hanging stiff and unmoving even when the wind cut sideways through the mourners. Their heads were shaved smooth, scalps pale and unmarked, and they did not speak, did not bow their heads, did not so much as shift their weight in the hour the service lasted. The boy noticed they never blinked at the same time as each other. He noticed too that his father, Usually a man assembled from straight lines and silences, a man who corrected posture and counted minutes, looked at the four men exactly once, and then did not look at them again. 5 days later, his father came home holding a white box tied with red string, and he was smiling. It was a smile the boy had never been shown before, wide and loose and somehow too large for his father's face, as though the muscles required for it had been borrowed rather than owned. He knelt to the boy's height in the hallway, the white box held out like an offering. Inside were sweets wrapped in colored foil, more than the boy had ever been allowed to look at, let alone keep. His father pulled him into a hug that lasted a beat too long, one hand pressing flat and firm against the boy's back, and said, in a voice gone soft and strange, that everything was going to be different now. A promotion, more money than he'd ever made in his life, a new department, his name on the door. The boy ate the sweets that night alone at the kitchen table, in the chair his mother used to sit in, and found the sugar sat wrong in his stomach. Sweet, then sour, the way joy tastes when it arrives at the wrong address. The months that followed were quiet in the particular way grief makes a house quiet. Not silence, but the absence of one specific kind of sound. The boy grew used to his father's new lightness, the unfamiliar humming in the shower, the new watch on his wrist, credit card statements left open on the counter with numbers too large to be real. They were going to move, his father announced one evening over dinner, practically vibrating with a happiness that still didn't sit naturally on him, like a coat bought one size too large. A second promotion, the kind of money that buys a house with a garden and a street with other children on it. Soon, very soon. That night, the boy heard it. It came up through the floor of his own bedroom now, not through the ceiling as his mother had once described. A low, hollow thud, rhythmic, 4 seconds between each strike, with a quality he would spend years afterward failing to describe to anyone who asked. Not like a fist on wood, like a wide, flat palm against something stretched taut and dry. Leather pulled tight over a frame, struck dead center, the sound swallowing itself half a second after it bloomed, leaving a hollow absence in the air where an echo should have been. He lay perfectly still and felt it climb his spine through the mattress, through the floorboards, through the building's old dead bones. Every night after, it returned a little louder, a little closer, as though something were slowly closing the distance between the abandoned floor and his own narrow bed. And every morning, he woke a little weaker. A deep ache settled into his shins, and the long bones of his arms, a bruised, hollowed-out feeling as though his marrow had been quietly siphoned out while he slept and replaced with something colder. He began to recognize the particular plum-violet shade blooming without explanation along his own collarbone, and some small, cold part of him understood, before he had words for it, that he was retracing his mother's last months exactly, step for step, ache for ache. On the 7th night, the thudding grew loud enough that the water glass on his nightstand shivered a thin, high ring with each strike. He could not lie still under it anymore. He pushed back his blanket, swung his aching legs over the side of the bed, and went looking for his father. The master bedroom door stood open onto darkness and an unmade bed, his father's side cold and empty since before midnight. Down the hallway, the front door of the apartment hung 2 inches ajar, and a thin blade of night air slid through the gap, carrying the wet mineral smell of the stairwell and the sound, closer now, no longer muffled by walls, of that same patient 4-second rhythm, no longer beneath him but above, pouring down through the stairwell shaft as though from a great height. He stepped out into the corridor in his bare feet. The wooden staircase, warped soft with decades of damp, let out a long, wet creak under his weight, the particular groan of wood that has absorbed water for years and forgotten what it means to be solid. Each step gave a fraction before it held, a small, sickening give, like pressing a thumb into something not quite dead. He climbed past the second floor, past the third, the rhythm growing clearer with every landing race. No longer a thud now, but something with edges, a deep, resonant strike, 4 of them in close but staggered succession, as though 4 separate hands were taking turns on 4 separate skins. On the abandoned top floor, where his mother had once told him the windows were boarded and the door nailed shut, he found the door very much open. From the gap between its frame and the rotted jamb, a single thin blade of warm yellow light cut sideways into the cold dark of the landing, trembling faintly with each strike of the drums beyond it. He pressed his eye to the slit. The room beyond had no furniture, only bare stone floor and walls black with the residue of something burned for years in the same 4 corners, the air thick with incense gone sweet and rotten, mixed with the colder smell of wet stone breathing through cracked plaster. In each of the 4 corners sat one of the bald men from the funeral, robes pooled around them like spilled ink, each before a wide, ancient drum the color of old bone, its skin stretched taut and yellowed. Their palms came down with slow, devastating patience. 4 seconds, strike, 4 seconds, strike. Wide and flat and dry, the exact sound that had climbed through every floor of the building for a week. In the center of the room, his father sat cross-legged on the cold stone, eyes closed, face slack and shining with sweat, lips moving around a low, gravelly chant that seemed to come from somewhere lower than his throat, a sound with no real words in it, only weight. The boy watched his father's chest rise and fall in time with the drums, watched his hands rest open and upturned on his knees, as if waiting to receive something. Then the drumming stopped, not faded, not slowed, but stopped, mid-strike, all 4 hands frozen an inch above the skins in the same breath. The silence that followed was somehow louder than the noise had been. One of the bald men, without turning his head, lifted a single finger and pointed it at the door. His father's eyes opened. He rose without hurry, crossed the bare stone floor, and pulled the door wide. For one suspended moment, father and son simply looked at each other across the threshold, the warm yellow light spilling fully onto the boy's face now. And his father smiled. Not the borrowed, oversized smile from the night of the white box, but something quieter and infinitely worse. A smile of warmth and pride, of a debt being honored on schedule, of a father genuinely, terribly pleased with his son. The drums resumed in the same heartbeat, 4 palms striking down together, and pain detonated through the boy's body all at once, through his shins, his collarbone, the long bones of his arms, a white, bottomless ache that buckled his knees against the cold floor of the landing. The door clicked shut. Years later, in a house with a garden and a street full of other children's bicycles, the father sat at the head of a long, lit table, a glass of dark wine warming in his hand. Across from him, his new wife laughed at something one of the dinner guests had said, her smile wide and easy, untroubled, and he reached over and rested his palm flat against the small of her back, the way a man rests his hand on something he has paid for in full.